Today, I'd like to introduce Doug Bopst, a former felon and drug addict who has transformed into an award-winning personal trainer, author, speaker, podcast host, and business owner. You may have seen him on the Today Show, Men's Health, Forbes, or countless other notable platforms. Doug, welcome to the show.
Lauren, great to see you again.
So nice to see you. So we met last month at Dear Media IRL in Austin, Texas. So I thought it'd be fun to bring it full circle and actually record a podcast episode.
Yeah, that was a great event, wasn't it? It was great to connect with you and to learn more about what you're doing. And I think kind of everything you have going on in your life is amazing. So congrats.
Thank you so much. So let's rewind a bit. I'm curious what your childhood was like. Tell us more about life for young Doug.
It's interesting. Like when we were talking in Austin, we were sharing about each other's podcasts, and I shared that I host a podcast called The Adversity Advantage, and I used adversity to my complete disadvantage when I was a kid. And I had a lot of, I guess, smaller types of adversity, maybe people might say. I mean, my parents got divorced when I was 5. I was bullied a lot when I was in school. I loved sports. I loved watching sports. I loved playing sports. I loved collecting baseball cards, football cards. The problem was I wasn't good at sports. I wasn't athletic whatsoever. I didn't get any interest from the girls that I was interested in because I was unathletic, just not confident, super scared of my own shadow. And then I started to develop this what's wrong with me mindset that I was like, man, why is everybody else being dealt like the similar set of cards where they're, a guy and we're going to the same school, same environment and stuff. And how come they are succeeding at sports? How come their parents are together? How come they're happy with themselves? How come they're getting attention from girls? And here I am not having any of those things. And then also when I was like, I forget, maybe 10, 11, 12 years old, I started to develop I started to gain some body fat. So now I'm shopping and getting like husky pants, husky clothes, which again was like different from my friends or the people that I wanted to fit in with at school. So I had this massive like weight on my back of what's wrong with me. I'm a loser. I'm a failure. I'm never going to amount to anything. And that weight became so painful for me as a kid. I mean, I would get bullied at school and people would call me Down syndrome Doug, because they used to say that I looked like I had Down syndrome, and they would just call me so many different hateful names. And there'd be times where I would literally come home and I would just cry because I was so miserable with who I was and my situation. And plus it was like, I wasn't the kid who like was picking on other kids or doing things that would provoke somebody wanting to pick a fight with me or pick on me or whatever. Like in my mind, I wasn't doing anything. So I was like, why am I the one who's being picked on so much? And that weight had to burst somehow. And the way that it began to dissipate for me was when I started to smoke weed when I was 14. And when I took that first hit off a marijuana pipe, I felt that weight come off my back. I didn't have to worry about the anxiety anymore. I didn't have to worry about what kids thought of me. I didn't have to worry about the fact that my parents didn't talk to each other. I didn't have to worry about my unathletic life or whatever. I could just be me and just kind of zone out. And that feeling ended up becoming incredibly addicting. And I chased that feeling of checking out every single day for years, until ultimately, I started to get into more trouble, graduate doing more drugs, selling drugs, and inevitably ended up in jail on felony drug charges.
Yeah. And we're going to get there. What I want to highlight now is number one, how growing up, how much we are impacted by the opinion of others and what they say about us. And we let it come to form our identity because we don't know any better. And so it's easy to look back and like understand what happened. But in those moments, it can be so challenging for a young kid who is being bullied, who is being talked down to, and you are looking for an escape.
Yeah. And it's interesting, being that, you and I have both done a lot of work on ourselves. We've both overcome a lot. And I think the opinions of others don't really get to me or you as much as maybe they would have at certain points in our lives, right? I think the reason it really got to me is because there was a lot of validity in what they were saying to me. in the
Mm.
sense where if I was being called fat, well, I was like overweight. Like I was wearing husky and bigger jeans than all the kids that I knew.
Mhm.
People told me that I was ugly and a loser. I'd be like, well, the girls aren't interested in me. I'm not good at sports. So there's some validation there, right? Or if people were to say that, um, I was going to be a failure for the rest of my life, I would look at where my life was and the behaviors that I was doing and what my life looked like at the time. And I was like, well, there's validity to that. So I think it becomes even more alluring to believe the opinions of others like
Mhm.
that when your life in some ways reflects that, which
Mhm.
is my biggest, it's just why I think so many people have a hard time with like affirmations when they're in a dark place, is because of the cognitive dissonance that it creates. Like if you're broke, 100 pounds overweight, you just like cheated on your partner, like you did all these things to like, inevitably like disrupt your life, and you're telling yourself, I'm lovable, I'm this, I'm that. It's like, how are you supposed to believe that if your life is a mess? Not to say that you aren't, but there's a
Right.
lot of people that have a hard time with it because you almost think of yourself as a liar because there's no proof of that in your life.
Mhm. Yeah, and because I know more about your story, I know your parents divorced when you were young, correct?
Yeah.
So that I feel like that was another part of you, like trying to find yourself in that, and having these kids bully you, it was just like the perfect storm for you to start and turn to drugs.
It was, and I think there was a lot of, chaos in the home in the sense where my parents didn't communicate with each other. And when you're a young kid, you really don't understand why. You know that they're split up and they're divorced, but you don't understand the impact that it's having on you. You don't understand that there's this void for connection. There's this void for community. There's this void for wanting to be loved that had to be filled somehow.
Yeah.
And I think just as a survival mechanism, I found trying to do whatever I could to fit in with other people, no matter what their character was like, as
Mhm.
a way to fit that.
Mhm.
I found drugs and acting out and selling drugs as a way to fill that.
Yeah.
I found, just doing whatever I could to create attention, drama, etc., as a way to fill that. Is that the right thing to do? I mean, no, but it all makes sense if you can like look back and start to connect the dots. And I don't blame my parents for that. I mean, I wouldn't be where I am today without all of that happening. But that's the reality of the situation. I mean, that's the last thing I'll say, and I'll punt it back to you. One of the hardest things for me to unlearn as an adult, in my 20s, was that just because somebody makes you mad or you don't like somebody means that it doesn't necessarily mean you have to never speak to them again. Right? Or not
Mhm.
every fight, not every disagreement has to end in like this massive argument.
Yeah.
And even though you might dislike what somebody does, doesn't mean that you can't come to some sort of um agreement or sense of like understanding in the middle. And so I didn't see any of that growing up. And so yeah, I mean, our childhood definitely shapes us so much. I just think it can be a trap like I fell into, where you end up blaming that for all the other decisions you make in your life.
Mhm.
And so you kind of have to be careful to balance those two things
Right.
out.
To not use it, not have the victim mindset, but more of a growth mindset, and to not see things in such black and white terms.
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
So I want to like dive into this. Like talk to us about some of the moments when you realized maybe the drug usage was a problem. Like were you ever worried about your well-being?
Um, Multiple times. I think though, when you're in that much pain and you're doing so many drugs, you think it's just normal. You think that's the way life's supposed to be. And I thought I was going to be dead by the time I was 25. So those scares weren't as scary than they may have been to the average person, because I went to countless funerals when I was a kid of people that I spent time with, not just people that I saw like at the grocery store. I mean, Facebook wasn't as big. Facebook, I think, became popular maybe when I graduated high school, I think, but it wasn't like acquaintances. It was people that I spent time with on the weekends and stuff. And so death, I was more emotionally numb to the thought of death. But that said, was there scary times? Yeah. I mean, there was definitely these roadblocks where I should have changed my life. Some that come to mind are my 16th birthday. I was weighing out some weed to settle a neighbor. My mom, 'cause at the time we split 50 custody 50-50 with my mom and my dad. My mom walked in on me selling weed, found it, kicked me out of our house that night. And then I went to go live with my dad full time the next day, changed schools, everything within 24 hours. Could have been a nice way to change my life then, but now I had more trauma, abandonment issues. Now I'm not seeing my mom at all. I'm got distance with my brothers. So that created a whole other subset of issues. Next moment, I forget how old I was. Maybe I was like 18, 19. No, I was 17 because I just graduated high school. I was homeless, bouncing around from couch to couch. I was living on my friend's couch for a few months towards the end, at the end of the summer. He was going off to college. His parents had told me I could stay there for as long as I needed to, but because he was going off to college, it'd be weird for me to be living on their couch without him there, right? Obviously. So anyway, at that time, I'm selling a bunch of weed. I'm snorting coke, smoking a pack and a half of cigarettes a day. I'm eating, horribly. Like, I mean, when I say horribly, like I would wake up at like 3 p.m., get high, eat like a foot-long cheesesteak, an entire pizza, and like a bunch of ice cream. Like that was like a meal for me. And I had this massive anxiety attack, which I didn't know. I thought I was having a heart attack. Like one night, my face went numb, my heart started racing, started getting all these weird pains. And like I said, I'd been to funerals at this time, and my lifestyle was completely unhealthy. I was like, oh, well, maybe I am having a heart attack. Ended up going to the emergency room. My friend's mom like rushed me to the emergency room because I told her I thought I was dying. And of course, she looks at me like I'm crazy because she's like, Doug, you're a teenager. Like, what do you mean? And so I ended up getting like strapped down to a bed to do all these tests. And they told me like, listen, like for as many drugs as we tested you for or whatever they said that I was on, they're like, you're actually very healthy. Your heart is healthy. You just need to like cut out the drugs and figure out a way to manage your anxiety. And you would have thought that would have been a moment for me to change. But because I had become addicted to that lifestyle, and also I had developed family within my friends, like, I mean, I was close with my friends' parents, and I was close with my friends, and I was going to parties, and I was like the man in town for selling drugs. That all became so addicting that the thought of even giving that up was like, there's like no way. I'm like, I can't give that up. I need this. And so ended up coming to terms with the fact that I was going to have to continue to find a way to get high and sell drugs without having anxiety. And I got offered like a Percocet one day, not too long after that. And a 5 milligram Percocet made all the anxiety go away, made all the same weight that the marijuana made go away when I was a kid. Took that weight away and then some after with all the other problems I created. And so that was like off to the races. I mean, I ended up developing a horrific addiction to Oxycontin, where I was snorting hundreds of milligrams up my nose every single day. And like, I really don't talk about this, but you want like how bad my health was. Like I didn't have a bowel movement for a month.
Oh my gosh.
That's how bad it was.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I know like I'm probably not dateable right now after saying that, but that was like a long time
Leave
ago.
it out.
No, I don't care. Whatever. I mean,
Okay.
it's like, but that was my life when I was 19 years old. I mean, I'm 36 now and I haven't, done anything in over 15 years. But I still like, even in those moments, I cling to the drugs and the substances still as a way to survive.
Yeah. And
that led to me going to jail, and jail crazily ended up saving my life.
Yeah, we're going to get into that. I mean, it's pretty incredible to look at the extremes we will go to before admitting there's a problem or seeking help. And one of my questions is, were you ever sober? Like once you started using at this level, was there ever a moment you were sober, or was it from like wake up to go to bed you were?
Nah, from like the age 14 till like 21, there was like no stopping.
Yeah. Because I'm sure those moments of being sober were uncomfortable and didn't feel good, considering all the substances you were.
Well, I had so much access to things. It was around me all the time.
Yeah.
Like I had no issue finding drugs ever. And then I'm selling like thousands of dollars worth of pot a week. And so I have access to other drugs that people didn't have access to. And I was able to buy things in bulk that people couldn't buy. And so there was no time for me to not think about it. It was just a lifestyle.
It became your identity. It was a lifestyle. People needed you. You were the man to make it happen.
Yeah, and as a kid who didn't get a lot of attention or validation, at least from the people that I wanted validation and attention from, it felt good to have, 100 missed calls or a bunch of text messages that, I didn't answer because I was out doing something, and it gave me a sense of power that I didn't have and control, where I finally felt that, I was needed and I was loved and I was wanted by people, even though it was so fleeting. And it's so crazy to think that I even thought like that. And I share some of this stuff about that, the bowel movement, all that stuff, because it's I can look back at those situations now and talk about them confidently, and also say, if I can do it and I can make a change from those positions, I think most people can as well.
Yeah.
It's just, it becomes very challenging when you create this new identity, like you mentioned, and this new sense of normalcy, that you have blinders on and you're in the weeds, right? So that's one layer of it, is that all of my friends were doing and selling drugs. The people that I was partying with were all selling drugs and getting messed up. Then you had all the people that were buying stuff from me that were doing that. So my world was that. So anything outside of that was just abnormal to me.
Yeah.
Right? Even though people might have been like, Doug, stop. And I'd be like, what? Everybody else around me is doing it. That's one layer. The other layer that makes it really difficult is, think about this. You're trying to come off of something that is taking away all of the pain in your life, all the mental pain, spiritual pain, emotional pain, physical pain, if you're somebody that's, in certain pain from aches and stuff. And then when you give it up, you're at the lowest point of your life with no self-esteem, no self-confidence. So your ability to, in your mind, to get out of a situation like that, it just seems like impossible. Yeah. And so I had all these layers to the problem that made it, even if I had wanted to stop, just difficult. It's also given me a lot of compassion now for people that have a hard time making a change. It doesn't mean that I justify or enable the behavior, but I understand it, because I know that when people are making a change, most people don't make changes when they're super confident about themselves. It's when something happens. It's after the divorce. It's after they lose the job. It's after a breakup. It's always after something that brings them way down. They're oh, now that my life is crap, I got to make this change. I should have probably done it when I had some momentum and I was already feeling good about yourself. Now you got to work on feeling good about yourself, and then you got to make this change. And it's hard.
Yeah.
It's so hard.
It was just easier to stick with it than to stop, because especially since it was going on all around you, so easy to justify and feel like it's a valid choice because everyone around you is doing the same thing.
And there was no dangers like there is today. There was no fentanyl back then. I think I may have done fentanyl recreationally. There used to be these lollipops, but there wasn't the crisis we face now where it's mixing everything. I would be dead. Because I was a guy that, as long as somebody told me it was something, I'm doing it. It didn't matter if I tested it or not. It was I was told it was something that could make me feel outside of myself and give me a bit of a rush in any way possible. I'm there.
Let's go.
Yeah.
So you were sentenced to years in jail due to being caught with drugs. Take us back to that moment when you were arrested.
So Cinco de Mayo 2008, I was riding around with a few of my friends to make a drug deal. And I had a busted headlight that I'd been meaning to get fixed for months. And I didn't, because of what I just shared before, that my world was doing and selling drugs. So anything that didn't fit into that box, I wasn't having, even if it made common sense, even because I had people that knew me that were like, Doug, you're riding around with all this money, drugs, you have a headlight, you better get that fixed, you're gonna get pulled over. I was like, I'll be fine. I thought I was untouchable. I thought I was just completely untouchable. And so riding around with a few of my friends, and I have this busted headlight. There's a cop running radar, and it's one of the biggest we were in Austin, right, on Cinco de Mayo. Yeah, we were in Austin. We met Cinco de Mayo, I think. It's interesting. But anyway, it was one of the biggest drinking nights of the year. So I ended up flashing my high beams at this cop, thinking that it was going to hide the fact that I had a busted headlight. And really, it just gave him a reason to pull me over. So I see the sirens go on. My heart, that moment, sinks in the pit of my stomach. Like, man, my life is definitely over. Like, I just knew I was going to get caught.
Yeah.
Pulls me over, comes up to my window. I stammer to get my license and registration out. One thing leads to the next. He ends up searching my car, finds a couple $1,000s in cash in the glove box, finds a half pound of weed in the trunk. And I'm in handcuffs. And all I could think about is how my life was over. And how any like remote dreams I had or anything that I thought I could have potentially been, if I somehow changed my life, was done. I was like, man, my parents are never going to want to speak to me again. Like all these thoughts were going through my head. And I remember just sitting in the back of this cop car in handcuffs and just thinking to myself, like, how did I get here? Like, how did the kid who just wanted to be loved, how did the kid who just wanted to fit in and be good at sports and just be a kid, how did he end up in the back of a cop car facing felony drug charges? And I go back to this answer, which some people push back on because they'll say, well, you were just a kid. But it's the reality is that it was my inability to deal with stress. It was my inability to deal with my emotions. It was my inability to say no to other people. It was my inability to face my demons and look at them. It was my inability to make better choices. And that's a fact. You know, like I can blame my parents all I want. I can blame the kids who picked on me all I want. I can blame the girls who rejected me all I want. Did I use those things as momentum when I got out of jail? Yes. Did I use those things as a chip on my shoulder to say, I'm going to prove you wrong? Yes. But when I sat there and I used them as an excuse to continue to behave poorly, that's what got me into some serious trouble. Because the story is great. I could have told you, oh my gosh, my parents got divorced and it was so bad, or I don't have a girl, like whatever. Like these kids are picking on me. They're like calling me all these horrible names. And people would be like, that's so sad and poor you. And I could be like, oh, see, they get me and they understand how bad my life is. And I could essentially just validate doing whatever I wanted to. And that's a really slippery slope. And I think a lot of people do that today. And it gets them into a lot of trouble with their life because they refuse to acknowledge their role in the situations that they're in. And so I end up, to kind of bring it back full circle, end up getting taken to jail that night and charged with the felony, which was possession with the intent to distribute marijuana. Went to court September 30th of 2008. And the judge, in my mind, I was 20 years old. I thought he threw the book at me because he's like, I'm sentencing you to 5 years, but I'm suspending everything but 90 days, meaning I was going to have to do the 90 days in jail. But if I violated probation, if I caught another charge, if I did anything to go against his terms, I could potentially have gone back and done the full 5 years in jail. Gave me 5 years probation, 200 hours of community service, all kinds of fines and drug classes. But he's like, you're young. Like, he's like, Doug, you're 20 years old. This felony conviction is going to haunt you for the rest of your life. He's like, I'll make you a deal. And I'm like, deal? I'm going to jail. Like, I'm on probation for 5 years. Like, what's the deal here? He's like, if you complete everything without messing up, you don't fail a drug test, you don't miss a probation appointment, you do community service, you do all the things, I will take the felony conviction off of your record at the end of the 5 years and give you probation before judgment, which essentially means the guilty conviction is gone. The conviction is technically not on my record anymore. And then I could eventually, get this thing kind of expunged. And so I took the deal, even though I was like, well, it doesn't really matter. I'm not going to live that long anyway. And then I reported to jail a week after my 21st birthday. And I cried. I tell the story in that I cried the day I walked in because I didn't want to go to jail. And I cried the day I left because I didn't want to leave.
Mm-hmm. I love hearing that. Because a lot of people wouldn't expect you'd cry on the way out. I get the crying on the way in,
sure.
But it tells a lot about the experience you had there and how that it was transformative for you. And I know a big part of that was because of your cellmate, right? And the relationship you formed and getting into shape in jail.
Yeah, jail was interesting, right? I think 100% of the people, they kind of cry when they go in, or they at least hide the tears back, right? And my first thing that I had to overcome was this horrific detox from opiates because I didn't stop. Like I was the guy who was almost late to reporting the jail because it was like I was getting high with my friends right before I left. And the detox was like maybe 2 to 3 weeks of cold turkey. It just felt like having the worst case of the flu, all the symptoms, all the things. But, the feeling that I was most uncomfortable with ended up being the most transformative. And it was the feeling like it was the feeling of like you're trying to crawl out of your own skin. You're trying to like leave your body. It's like this weird feeling that happens with the withdrawal times. And as I look back now, I can see that was like God using, that situation to like shed the old version of me so that the new version of me could become whole and born, etc. And so as I'm like in the midst of my detox, my soon to be cellmate, Eric, who looked like a more jacked version of Brad Pitt from Fight Club, was sitting there playing Scrabble. And he's like, dude, you're going to start working out with me when you get through your detox. And I was like, dude, there's no way I could be a model for Pillsbury. Like, there's no way I'm going to be able to work out. And he was just like, all right, man, whatever. And I saw him working out shortly after that. And he was doing, a bunch of push-ups, pull-ups, ab stuff, inside the common area of the jail. And then like not too long after that, we're having a conversation. This conversation really changed the trajectory of my life. And he said to me, he was asking me questions. He was like, why are you in jail? What did you do? Like, what happened? And I was blaming everybody else but myself. I was blaming my parents. I was blaming the kids. I was blaming girls. I was blaming everybody. Mm-hmm. And the PG version is he's like, quit being a victim. He's like, and when he said that to me, and people can put their mind to work to figure out what he really said to me. But when he said that to me, I kind of froze because I was expecting him to coddle me and say, it's okay, poor Doug. Like, your life is so bad. Like, I'm so sorry. But he said, listen, you're blaming everybody else for your problems but yourself. He said, there's plenty of people that went through the same situations as you that aren't in jail, right, Doug? And I'm like, yep. He's like, you got yourself here. And it's up to you to change. Like, nobody's coming to save you. And he said, you have two choices. Be a man, look yourself in the mirror and say, you got yourself here and it's up to you to change. Or go be a victim, go cry in the corner and say, woe is me, and blame everybody else for your problems. Like, most people will do that. And so, Lauren, at that moment, I felt this sense of empowerment. I was like, all right, well, the guy's clearly right. Because up until that point, I had 21 jobs. Like, I had broken relationships with my family, convicted felon, drug addict, drug dealer. Like, people's parents weren't letting their kids hang out with me. Like, my life was just not in a good place. I was like, maybe I'll like finally, in the worst moment of my life, try and like give this other path a try. And with his motivation and encouragement, training me in there every single day during my 90-day sentence, I went from not being able to do a push-up from my knees, not even able to hold myself up to do a push-up from my knees, not being able to walk up and down the steps, to being able to do a set of 10 push-ups and run a mile by the time my 90-day sentence was over. And those days in there completely reinvented and transformed me. And it wasn't necessarily just because of the exercise. That was the catalyst. It was what the exercise did downstream. It was finally being able to have self-discipline, finally being able to show up for myself even when I didn't want to. It was finally being able to deal with negative emotions in a positive way. It was finally being able to like believe in myself and like show up for myself even when the odds were stacked against me, and being consistent and being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Like, all the things that like you hear now, like I had to learn in like the darkest moment of my life. And I think it gave me this unique superpower because, listen, it's easy to do all the things when life is good. Like I said, it's easy to quote unquote transform your life when things are really going your way. But what counts is like when your life's in the crapper, like how are you responding? And so I learned all these techniques like in the scariest times of my life. So now all that has kind of built this crazy foundation within me that it really helps me navigate tough times. And so as you can imagine, I was very emotional when I left because this guy helped me transform my life. And I was scared, to be honest. I was like, I don't know if I want to leave here. Like, I've proven to myself that I'm a failure and that I'm a loser and that I'm going to make the wrong move every single time without being in this cage, if you will, right? How am I going to do it without this? And but thankfully I had enough momentum from that. I had this massive awakening and crazy mindset shift and belief in myself that I was able to create some solid momentum when I got out. And the day I left, Eric gave me a workout plan that I still have framed in my place on my shelf over there, so I never forget where I came from. Lost a bunch of weight, and then got to a place fitness wise where I wanted to become a personal trainer to help other people use fitness to change their lives. And then that like built a crazy amount of momentum and inspiration for me to do what I'm doing now with writing books and the podcast and speaking and stuff. But
Yeah.
it's crazy how like
It's quite the story.
Yeah, it's wild.
What was your biggest fear upon re-entering society?
Becoming the person that I didn't want to be anymore. You know, it was I hated the person I saw in the mirror before I went to jail. I mean, there was times where I would crush up a line of Coke, crush up a line of Oxy, mix them together, and I would just think to myself, I wonder if I snorted this and if I didn't wake up, like, would anybody even care about me? Would anybody even say anything to me about me or whatever? So I was in a pretty dark place at times. So that was my fear was am I going to be able to do this? Because I had so many people that I had let down, and then you have so many people that you're like, I'm going to change this time. I'm going to do it. And then you kind of, you have this confidence that you're going to do it, but you've let them down so many times that it's kind of hard for them to really believe you until they actually see it. And I also had been given this crazy, unique opportunity where I had this, I went to like SEAL training or boot camp, like for like 90 days to like completely like change who I was. And I didn't want to I was afraid I would throw away that opportunity and let my cellmate down or let the people down that was in jail. So it was a lot of it. But the biggest thing was I didn't want to become that version of myself anymore that I hated.
You didn't want to regress. You wanted to start a new chapter of your life. Did you have a vision for what you wanted to do when you left?
No, I mean, honestly, like identity, I think plays a massive role. We talked about this with the drugs and stuff, where I knew that, I mean, again, I had this massive chip on my shoulder, and that's what helped me in jail was people taught me how to channel anger into like fitness. They were like, just think about what makes you mad. So I would think about all the people that pissed me off in my childhood, and I would use that as leverage when I worked out. And so I thought about like the type of person that I wanted to be. And I wanted to be a guy who was self-confident. I wanted to be a guy who was ripped. I wanted to be a guy who attracted pretty girls. I wanted to be like, I kind of created this vision of who I wanted. And it got me into trouble actually in my 20s because I realized when I got there, it's not all it's cracked up to be. When you don't do the work on yourself. But that got me a long way because I thought to myself, okay, if I could just commit to exercising, eating well, spending time with the right people, doing all these things that I know will work every day and compound those days, it doesn't guarantee me that I'm going to get to that place, but it's going to get me a lot further than if I don't. And if I don't do those things, I know where that gets me. So I would literally just stack days. And again, I didn't read any personal development books. I didn't understand anything about this. This was just like common sense to me. So I just literally would like give it my all for one day and the next day, and then like 2 weeks would go by and I'd be like, holy crap. Like I haven't like touched drugs outside of jail. I mean, I haven't touched drugs like being on my own in like 2 weeks. Like that's crazy. Right. And then those days would start to compound, and then I would start to get more fit and start to do more things. And my interest started to change and got more interested in learning about health and wellness and nutrition. And then like I think the biggest mistake people make with like crafting a vision or even identity for their life is they try to like forecast so far in advance, and you haven't even lived that long yet. You know, like you don't even know. Like it wasn't like I had gotten out of jail. I was like, I'm going to be a podcaster. Like there's no way. I was like, I just want to not die and survive. Like, then you get to a place and you're like, oh, now my interest and my identity has changed. I've become a new version of myself. Now I'm interested in these things. Then you go and you give it your all in that sector, in that sector of your life. For me, that was being a personal trainer. And you're like, wow, like now I'm interested in speaking. People are drawn to my story. So I'm going to write a book. I'm going to do media. And then it's like, oh, you've become really kind of good at that. People are drawn to your story more. Now I'm going to do more national stuff. Now I'm going to hire a publicist. Now I'm going to write another book. And then these things just start to stack, you know, and then you end up like organically, because I think it's important to have goals and have a vision, but I also believe that, you know, you can't connect the dots moving forward. You can only connect them moving backwards. That's not my quote, so I can't steal that, but I think it's the reality. And I say that because I had this vision that gave me like a redirect where I told you I wanted to be the ripped guy who attracted pretty girls. And I did that in my 20s. Like there's pictures of me online, and I'd make a post every year. I share the same post about how miserable I was when I was like 5% body fat and I had every ab. I had like a 16 pack. You see every single one of my abdominal muscles. And I wasn't like skinny. I was like ripped, but I was miserable. And I was miserable because I thought that was like the path to happiness, was looking like that and getting attention from pretty girls and being successful. And in my 20s, I was the highest producing personal trainer in the history of the company I worked at, six-figure personal training business, back to back years, which is like unheard of for somebody who had no college degree, no fitness, like real background other than being in jail. I was in my early 20s, you know, like that was kind of unheard of. And I share that because I hit this emotional rock bottom that ended up leading me into another area of my life to work on. And then that like catapulted another like area of my career where I ended up becoming a Christian because I was so lost emotionally and spiritually that I needed to find something else to help guide me out of this emotional rock bottom and learn things like forgiveness and purpose and meaning and stuff. And so I share that just because I think it's important to like have goals and have a vision, but just don't be so like tied to them that there's no wiggle room for like any kind of course correct. Because life is going to throw you curveballs. And sometimes you got to like, you have to dance with the curveball. Otherwise you're going to swing and miss every single time, and you're going to end up striking out over and over again.
Yeah. You know, I think oftentimes people have this big grand vision and they're afraid to start because the vision's so big. But the way I like to think about this is like A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D, eventually leads to F, or whatever the vision actually is. But if you never start, you're never going to get there. So for you, for example, it was listening to what you felt called to do, whether that was originally start training, then it was going to Christianity, sharing your story, etc. It all, looking back, connects and leads to the next thing. But I just like referencing that because so often individuals can be so overwhelmed by this big grand vision. And just like you said, walking out of jail, you didn't know we'd be sitting here today having this podcast, but you started on your path to find yourself and you listened to what you felt called to do.
Yeah, like everybody wants to go from like chapter 1 to chapter 20, but what they don't realize is you have to go through chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5 in order to get yourself prepared to be chapter 20. It's like, you know, we were at the Dear Media conference and like Michael and Lauren started the podcast. I think it was in their dining room or in their kitchen or something like that. And they see where it's built now and how successful they are. And, you know, people I think forget that, you know, they forget that, you know, you have to go through the grind. You have to just you have to try and be okay with failing and learning certain things and just not being afraid to kind of pivot, because I thought that, you know, one of the hardest things for me to do was the less I've been involved in fitness and the more I was pulled away from it to do certain things like the podcast and writing and speaking and some of the mentoring and coaching that I do, was that I had a hard time letting go of that identity of like, well, fitness saved my life in jail, so that means that I have to do this for the rest of my life. Or it was like, no, fitness saved my life in jail and it led me to becoming a trainer, and that built a lot of the stuff that was necessary for me to be where I'm at now.
Yeah.
But it was like, if I had just hung on to like being a trainer, I mean, and started a podcast next year, I mean, I might be in a completely different place. Right. So I just think it's important to, like we both touched on the last few minutes, to like have these goals, but to also not be afraid to kind of pivot and just leave some room for growth in either direction, so that you're not so pigeonholed into that vision that you end up, you know, just being stubborn and then, life not working out the way you wanted.
Yeah, let life surprise you. I think forward momentum is important, that you're working towards something, but 100% be willing to pivot.
No doubt. I mean, you have to.
Yeah. So your podcast is the Adversity Advantage podcast.
It is.
How can we begin to use our adversity to our advantage?
It's a great question. I think the simple answer is just don't use it to your disadvantage. And what I mean by that is kind of like what I said earlier, is like one of the main reasons I started the show is that most people, including myself, it's not the adversity that breaks them, it's how they respond to the adversity. So it's not the breakup that destroys your life, it's the 2 bottles of wine you drink for 2 years after that can destroy your life, right? It's not the losing your job that destroys your life. It's, you falling into this deep rut for like 6 months, 9 months, going broke. That's what destroys your life, can destroy your life, right? And so I wanted to utilize my story and the framework around that into helping other people overcome various adversities in their life, whether it's relationship stuff, wellness stuff, business stuff, mindset stuff. So the idea of it is figure out ways to mitigate the pain, figure out ways to mitigate the downside. So like, relationships tends to be a hot topic, and it's honestly one of the easiest examples to use. But I think, if you go through like a breakup, which is an adversity, no matter like how good or bad the relationship was or how long or short it was, I think making the adversity worse for a lot of people would be like getting on like a million dating apps and just swiping, all day, every day, right? It would be turning to substances to numb the pain. It would be blaming your ex for everything in that relationship. It would be not taking care of your health. I mean, it would be just going out and spending a bunch of money you may not have on certain things to impress people, to build your self-esteem up, right? But what I've learned through the podcast about situations like this is you got to learn to take responsibility and accountability for your behaviors and your actions in a relationship. You have to have certain habits and disciplines in place to deal with the stress, anxiety, depression, mental health stuff that can come from a breakup: fitness, meditation, walking, mindfulness, prayer, community, etc., therapy. So you have to have all these things that will help mitigate the pain, and then also use those situations to an advantage. And not to say that you have to like, just purposely break up with somebody to like feel stronger and better about yourself. But it's more like, how can you use that situation to unlock a new version of you? Like, I look back at every adversity in my life, whether it is changing a career, whether it is breakups or stuff with, when I was younger with addiction or family stuff. I feel like every situation, even though I may not have handled it the best in that moment, it led to like me becoming better. And it also led to me like having introspection and being like, oh, like I could have handled that in a much different way. And so then you use those tools moving forward. Like that's what it's like to use adversity to your advantage. To me, it's how can you accept that life is going to just suck sometimes? Life is not going to be peachy all day, every day. But what counts is how are you utilizing those moments to learn, to grow, and to teach yourself that you keep showing up even when you don't want to. I mean, sometimes in life you have to play hurt. That's the reality, emotionally and mentally. You can't just sit on the couch and cry for months because you go through a breakup. I mean, you can, but your life is not going to get any better. And some people hate when I say that, but it's a reality, because then you end up sitting there and you're wondering why you don't, maybe your career has suffered. You're wondering why your mental health has suffered. You're wondering why your relationships have suffered. You're wondering why you're not where you want to be in life. And then you end up blaming what happened months ago. And that's a very addictive pattern to be in, because there is currency in that. Like I said, I could make a post right now that was like feeling sorry for myself. And I think there'd be a lot of sympathy, right? Because I think people are naturally compassionate people. right? And so you have to be careful, and you have to, again, take a moment to pause when it comes to adversity and think about your role in everything. And then, like I said, some of the things that you can use to get better depending on the situation. But a lot of it's the same. A lot of it is fitness, taking care of your health, hanging out with great people, therapy if you need to, getting spiritual in a way that works for you, taking sole responsibility and accountability for your actions. Stop complaining about what other people have done to you. I mean, it's all the same, just depending on, what the flavor of adversity is.
Yeah. I want to reference this quote by Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps and went on to write about it and empower others to live their best lives. And what he said is, between stimulus and response lies our freedom, because we have the power in how we get to respond instead of react. And I think this is what we're saying is, like, be intentional after your adversity about how you respond to it. And there lies your freedom in regard to choosing to take care of yourself, choosing, what's next for you, and getting in the driver's seat of your story.
Yeah, I mean, you have to, because I think the minute you give your power and control over to somebody else, it's over. Because now you're just going to assume that the world's against you, and you're going to assume that there's nothing you can do about it, and you're going to end up not changing because you're just going to be, well, it doesn't matter. Like, the odds are against me anyway, and I have no control over my life. And that's a really, really bad place to be, especially in today's world where there's a lot that goes on a day-to-day basis, and you got to just be ready, and you have to be like super in tune with yourself and do the best you can and take care of your own mental, spiritual, emotional, and physical health.
Mm-hmm. Well, Doug, where can our listeners find you?
So social media at Doug Bopst everywhere. Podcast Adversity Advantage everywhere you get your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, YouTube. DougBopst.com has more information about me, other interviews I've done, speaking stuff I do. You can buy my books there as well. But thank you for the great questions and the conversation. This was a lot of fun.
I loved it. Thank you so much for coming on today.